Anyway,
not great, is it?
No. Anyway, yeah, so we've heard the term daddy issues a lot, so I just thought it'd be good to talk about it. And what I wanted to ask was, has your relationship with any of your dads affected your relationships in any kind of way, either negatively or positively?
Well, if I knew
Mine's
who
been
you
negative.
were. Daddy,
No,
where
I know
are
who my
you?
father is. But,
Wherefore art thou, Daddy?
I think a majority of us do have daddy issues. I think before I would always think that whether you're in a single parent, like if you have two parents, the likelihood of you having daddy issues would be like super low. But I've actually found out whether you're in a single parent home or you're in a two parent home.
But what about for you personally?
For me personally, not having my dad around, I think made me want, how do I put it? Even when my dad was around, he wasn't like the greatest example. And then him going off and kind of doing his thing and having his own family, it just made me less aware of what men should be like. I didn't know, what the average man does in a home. I didn't really know what to expect. So when it came to me kind of making decisions on the kind of guys I would date, I would say communication. I wouldn't know really how to talk to a guy. Like, what's the tone? What's the language? Like, they're different. And so, because I'm like growing up in a female dominant household, my interactions with men are just really minimal. So then I'm going out into the world expecting the most and not really understanding, like, all right, where is that middle ground? Where is that compromise?
So did not having your dad around make you feel empty in a sense, or like you was missing out on something, or there's a part of you that was missing?
I think what was missing, so the lack of understanding for men in my life, I would fill it in with what I would see on TV and the media and films. So anything I would see in romance movies or anything that I would listen to in particular songs that made relationships sound amazing and made relationships just sound like, it would just be like heaven on earth and a fairy tale. I kind of use that as my way to kind of fill in the gaps of what I should expect from men. So it's kind of just having like a highly warped, almost like too positive.
Idealistic.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people in general, and I say people because I think the assumption is that daddy issues or having a father complex is something that just women experience. A lot of men actually have a father complex, and they suffer from their own daddy issues. But I think a lot of people listening, women in particular, would probably be able to relate to the fact that you didn't know how to navigate relationships with men because your father, as a woman, as a girl, as a young girl, sets the tone for any kind of interaction or attachment you have with a man. Because that's your first, in an ideal world, that's your first interaction with a man.
Can you only have daddy issues if your dad's not around, though?
No,
Or do you
not
think
at all.
I mean, Rita, your dad's around. Your parents are still together. Has he set the tone for you?
Yeah, I would say for me, it has really defined the kind of guys I like, the kind of guys I go for, just having my dad around. But then one thing, because my dad's amazing, and the thing about my dad, he's not a words man, he's an action man.
Oh, the best.
Yeah, but I never...
Which action man is he out of the Marvels? Oh my God.
No, she means he does. Oh, okay, I see where you're going.
Yeah.
Troy.
But what I found when I was younger...
She really tried. She tried.
Anyway, Rita, what
I found when I was younger, because my dad wasn't a man of many words, I always wanted to like impress him, and like I always wanted him to be proud of me and for him to say, I'm really proud of you. Yeah. But when I was younger, that wasn't something that he said as a Nigerian man that's working all the time. He wasn't thinking, do you know what I mean? And he didn't really come from a background where he had a great relationship with his dad. Like he had his dad wasn't that great and stuff like that. So it made him be determined to be the best dad that he could be. So he didn't really know how to like, how as a little girl, that's what I'd want to hear and stuff
verbally.
Verbally. But his way of showing that he loves me was making sure that, I had the right education and making sure I had the things that I needed, and that's how he showed his love. So as a young person, I didn't realize what that was, but I did find that when I did meet guys and stuff, I had this thing in me that wanted to impress them. Do you know what I mean? The same way I did with my dad. Like, so I wanted, like I said, I think I mentioned before, like that idea of trying to prove that you need me in your life.
Would you marry someone like your dad?
Well, absolutely, because it's the only
I don't think
type of guy.
Women can say that.
Absolutely, that's what I'm trying to say. It's made it difficult because obviously there's no one that's like my dad, but just in terms of like me having a man that's really ambitious, a man that has a really good heart. So when I say, a man that has a good heart, I'm like talking about like not a man that's kind only to the person he fancies, but a man that is in general, he's just a kind man to everyone. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, there's definitely attributes
qualities
of my
dad
that I look for in men, and that's where I got the whole idea of potential that I'm always going on about.
Amina, what would you? I was going to say.
Yeah, the dad that I grew up with, that I thought was my dad, ended up not being my dad. So it's kind of like a Jeremy Kyle show situation.
EastEnders.
Yeah, so EastEnders. So basically, I grew up the man that I grew up thinking was my dad up until the age of like 21.
Wow.
Yeah. I found out that he wasn't my dad.
Can I ask how?
Yeah. A DNA test.
Wow.
What? Yeah.
Did something tell you that it wasn't, that he wasn't your dad?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but yeah, a DNA test happened and he's not my dad. And I was kind of like, when I found out, I didn't know how to feel because our relationship wasn't great anyway. So for me, it wasn't one of those stories where it's like, well, you're still my dad, I don't care, you raised me. I didn't feel that at all. I kind of felt, well,
this makes sense.
We didn't have an amazing relationship anyway, so it's like I feel like I haven't really lost anything other than the fact that now I don't know who my actual dad is. So fast forward now to like a couple of years later and me finding out who my real dad was, and then finding out that he'd passed away. Wow. So then it was like my real dad doesn't know that I exist. So he passed away not knowing that I exist. So it was like two losses. It's like I lost two dads in the space of like a couple of years. And I didn't really know how to react to it. I mean, initially I was just very angry. Like I was really upset with my mom. I was like, how can you like not know who you're sleeping with? Like all respect to my mom. But I was just very confused, angry. And I just didn't know how to take the news about any of it. But I thank God for my relationship with God, because that, if I didn't have that, I don't know how I would have dealt with it. Because for me, God is my father, and he's always been my father. Even when my first dad was around, I always saw God as my dad anyway. So not having him and then finding out my real dad had passed away, not knowing that I exist, and having this really weird part of me that is like, and essentially missing, like a missing puzzle that I don't know anything about. I can find solace in knowing that 100%. Regardless, God is my dad and he's taking care of me and I'm fine. And if I never get to meet anyone from his side of the family or get to ever resolve anything, I'm good, I'm okay. And I know that when I do end up getting married, the person I marry is gonna be an amazing father to my children, and my daughter's dad is a great dad to her. So I kind of just deal with it and just keep it moving. But in terms of relationships with guys, I've never actually really sat down to think to myself, do I have daddy issues? I don't know if, maybe I need therapy, because I don't I've actually never really sat down and thought to myself, if I do have daddy issues, what are the issues? Because the relationship I had with my dad before, my person I thought was my dad, it wasn't good at all. I just saw him, like, I remember my childhood of him just beating up my mum. Like literally like fighting my mum. And my mum's a fighter. Like my mum's a very, very strong woman. So when he was beating her, she was fighting back. And that's what I saw a lot of the time when I was younger. I've never had that kind of abusive relationship with a partner ever. But I just knew that can't run. Like that's not gonna happen. Yeah. And other than that, I've not really delved into however else I may be affected by the fact that, I've not really had a great example of a dad around me.
I mean, it is interesting that you kind of spoke on like the whole Christianity aspect, because I actually watched a sermon by Pastor Todd from Transformation Church. It was actually called Daddy Issues. So in that regard, it's kind of like we will all have daddy issues in the sense of we'll all feel some sort of emptiness and loss when it comes to expectations of people, especially like some of the male figures in our lives. But when we do look to God for that solace, he kind of fills in that gap and he fills in that hole. So maybe with you, why you feel like you don't have it is because you've already healed.
Yeah, before I even realised that there was something to heal. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's probably, it could be that.
Yeah. Have you guys ever done the attachment theory test?
No,
What's that?
So I'm no psychologist, but
Are you sure, girl?
but from memory, our relationships with our parents in childhood shape how we manage our relationships as adults and the kind of attachment style we have within romantic relationships as adults. And I think there are 4 different types. There's secure, being you are a secure person in your relationship. There's anxious, being probably someone who's quite clingy, needy, anxious, or may always feel like they have to prove something, or they need affirmation, they need love. There's fearful, and there's avoidant. And I think those 2 are kind of similar from memory, but I know one of them is like a fear of commitment, fear of entering a relationship, or just avoiding commitment point blank. So I've done the test. So I was like on the brink. I was secure, but my second one was anxious. And I kind of understood that because I think being the oldest, I'm very much a people pleaser. And when I was younger, my dad would travel quite frequently, and even within my teens. So for me, it was like, although on the whole, the things that I'm secure, but it was just about, and then I was anxious, and I feel like that boils down to, dad's gone, and then he's back, and then it's like, I need you, I want you here, I need you to be close to me, don't go again, and then he goes again, and then it's like, I need you here. But I would recommend like everyone do the test.
What about you, Oloni? How's your relationship
I think
with your
mine
dad?
is more like my relationship with my parents was not the greatest. But I feel like it wasn't any different to a lot of people who have gone through divorces, so kids who have seen their parents divorce. Dad got with someone else when I was like 13, had a new family. And in a way it hurt because I was just like, I felt robbed as a teenager. Because it was just like, wow, you took something from me and you've given it to a whole new family. But it's a weird one because it's just like, I've seen my mum single-handedly raise 2 amazing girls. My sister's just passed her exams, so she's a doctor. You know, I'm Oloni. So for me, it's just like, in a way, I look at my mum and I see her as a superwoman. And even though I don't have the closest relationship with God, I've seen that God has used my mum in a way. So my mum has like a really, really tight relationship with Christianity. So in a way, I've seen her use religion to guide her and propel her and give her the guidance that she needs to raise me and my sister. But in a way, it still does hurt because when I was growing up, I would look at TV dads, for example. Until now, I still do it. I'd be like, I want my husband to be like Michael Kyle from My Wife and Kids, or I want my husband to be like Uncle Phil. You know, there were so many, not Bill Cosby, but there were so many black dads that I saw in TV, and I was just like, why do they get to have that and I don't? So I kind of felt robbed as a kid. So maybe when I have relationships now, I try to hold on and make sure that, do you know what, I'm gonna try at this. I'm not gonna try and dispose of it so easily because I don't want to recreate what I saw in my childhood. And I feel like a lot of women do that today, is why we hold on to relationships so dearly and we believe that nothing else is gonna happen.
It's almost that too good to be too true syndrome.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do think sometimes daddy issues can also allow us to blur the lines on when a guy's actually good for you and when he's not. And so when the guy who is good for you is staring right in front of your face, like you said, you become anxious and fearful and you almost like self-sabotage the whole situation because you're just not as sure. But maybe if we actually, if we had like father figures who set the example, we'd be a lot more sure and decisive on when we know that there's a good man in front of us.
Looking back, do you think that, looking back at your past relationships, do you think it was affected by everything that we've just spoken about in terms of like your dad not being around or being around.
Yeah, I don't always trust. I don't trust men easily. I don't trust them. I always feel like sometimes they might be too good to be true, especially when a good one is like staring at me. I'm just like, nah.
Also, it's made you fearful in a
Yeah,
sense.
it's definitely made me fearful because, like, my dad, for example, like you meet him, you love him. He's a charmer. He makes everyone laugh. Like he gets along with everyone. But there are times where it's just like what you show everyone is not what you're showing your family. So when I see a guy who's good to me, I'm just like, okay, that's nice. But if we're alone, are you going to be a dickhead?
Wow.
Or are you just going to be nice to those around you?
Yeah.
And I can't stand, I think there's a word that my mum used to call it. I can't remember. She used to call it bobo nice. So it means
the nice
bobo is
guy,
nice to
the nice
everybody
to
else,
everyone, yeah.
but he ain't sweet to you when it's just you two. So that's how I'm hesitant when it comes to relationships and dating.
Yeah. What about you?
I think maybe for me, I kind of, in my previous relationship, was maybe a little bit naive about, I think just not knowing how to navigate a relationship in general. Like just not knowing what to expect from a guy or what the standards were or how I should expect to be treated. Because everything I saw was so negative. There wasn't really anything like, okay, this is what it's supposed to be. I kind of just thought, okay, this is how it is. And therefore, when it came to me being in a relationship with a guy, it was kind of like, okay, I just know that he can't put his hands on me, first of all. But then everything else is like, what if he's being emotionally abusive? Or what if he's being verbally abusive? Or what if he's like not being consistent or not being kind or just not being caring enough? Like, I didn't know what to look for in that aspect of things. So I was kind of going into things naively, just going with the flow, not really knowing, having any expectations or any standards.
Yeah.
So I think, that definitely may have affected me in that sense. But whereas now, I feel like as I've gotten older, I've created those standards for myself. Right. So regardless of whether I've been in a relationship or not, just from seeing male figures around me and other people in relationships and reading books and having a relationship with God and understanding God's love for me and understanding what God's expectations are for my husband, for me, and me as a wife to my husband, I have my own standards. I have those expectations. I have those things where I can say, okay, this is how I should be treated and this is how a good man should treat me.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm just quite picky, but then I've realised
No way.
You would have known. I've realised that, my dad is the way he is because of what he has, what his journey has been. So I can't expect a man that hasn't gone through that, or I can't expect anyone to be perfect, because my dad's not perfect either. And I had to learn that as well, like, because you grow up, hearing everything you guys are saying, obviously from a very privileged place of being able to have a man in the house and also seeing a man that, treats my mum my mum says that my dad like treats her like she was like an egg. And what she means is like so delicately, like he just makes sure that everything is good.
They don't make them like that.
Do you know what I mean? No, but I believe that they do. I just think...
No, they do.
But it just takes time, because there's other...
Or someone's
No, but it's just... There's loads. I'm sure, like, if we were to all open our eyes, like, you would see that there are men like that who are around us. You probably just... They're probably like your friend or something. You need to open your eyes, okay?
Shine your eyes.
But I just found that, like, there's no man that's perfect. And my dad's not perfect, I guess you would say your dad's not perfect, but no man's perfect. So for me, I've just become less pickier because I've realised no one's going to be like my dad.
I think for me, there was a bit of both. There was like the good and bad. Because in my dad, there's loads of stuff I see where when I'm dating someone, I'm like, oh, my dad does that. I really like that. Yeah. And there's stuff that my dad does or has done. I'm like, okay, well, whoever I find has to not be like that in any way, and I don't want to see that trait in them. So I've taken the good from my dad and put that into what I look for, and I've taken the not so good from my dad and put that into exactly what I don't want. But I think one thing that I'm aware of is going for men who are leaders. Because my dad is very, like, I grew up with typical Nigerian household. My dad is very much my way or the highway, leadership, this is how it's done. Oh yeah, everyone wake up, clean the house, this, like almost like a drill sergeant when I was younger. That's how it was. And I think that that has affected me in that I like men who aren't, I don't want to say pushovers, but I like men who take the lead. And because I feel like I can be quite dominating in relationships. And for that reason, I want a man who is, I don't want to say wears the trousers as such, because I kind of hate that term, but I like a man who takes charge. And I know that, okay, I don't have to overthink when I'm around you, because you will sort everything out, because you will manage and take control. And I think that stems from my dad wanting to have that leadership role all the time.
And creating that secure.
Yeah, and I think that has affected me, because if I meet a guy, he appeals to me more when he seems like he is a boss and he leads and he is in control. On the whole, I think it's affected me in that way.
I would say I think having daddy issues has probably affected me on the negative side in seeking so much reassurance when I'm in the relationship or when I'm in the situationship. So almost kind of just wanting, are you sure? Like, you know, I don't like being caught off guard. So if I feel like it's not going the way it needs to go or the way I think it needs to go, I want to kind of be aware that that's what's happening. So I guess maybe it's the kind of fear of, okay, I don't want someone to now do a disappearing act out of the blue, like let me be aware. So it's always kind of like checking in and kind of like getting them to reaffirm that like we're still good, which is a negative. And then I would say in terms of the guys that I do now look for, I try and avoid the loud ones because my dad was like very loud, very vivacious, like super popular. Everyone knew who he was for good and bad. So it's kind of like, I love to kind of avoid that. So the more louder they are, the less I believe them. Yeah, like the less I want to believe them and the less I'm kind of, the more suspicious I am of their intentions.
Do you think you mentioned like affirmation and words and people reassuring you? Do you think your love language?
I was about to say that. I was about to ask what everyone's love language is.
Acts of service.
So my love language is actually physical touch and quality time.
Do you think love languages are influenced by our
I think I was literally going to ask that. You were like literally the same, like thinking along the same line. Because I was thinking, like with me, my main, obviously when you do the test, it's like your top 5, like so in terms of the order. And my top one's words of affirmation, and the other one is quality time. And I think for me, words of affirmation comes from a place of not having that person or that role, because even though I didn't really have a great relationship with the person I thought was my dad and all that kind of stuff, my mum wasn't great with words either. So I didn't really hear a lot of like, I'm proud of you or well done or things like that. And I think that comes from also her being African and being Nigerian. This Nigerian parents just generally not knowing how to communicate affection and love in that sense. But we are breaking that generation of something. Okay? So I kind of like that. Like if a guy just naturally just gives words of affirmation. You know, some people, they just do things naturally because that's their personality. I love that. And I noticed that straight away in a guy, that's like when he's affirming.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm like the opposite. Like as soon as a guy is talking, saying like words of affirmation, I don't believe him.
Just switch off.
I literally switch off like completely, and I think it does go down to my dad being a man of action. Do you know what I mean? So my love language is acts of service and quality time. Yeah, and quality time. It used to be physical. I don't know. It's between quality time and physical touch. I feel like those two are equal, but it's acts of service, which I did not know for ages that it was. But I've realized that acts of service, like that, because it shows me that you actually care because you're willing to do something, you know, out of your way or whatever to like help me and stuff like that. And immediately I take you seriously. Like you've got my attention. All this talking. I'm literally like storyteller. All I hear is storyteller.
So sweet.
I just shut off.
Especially because a lot of guys that I get with are usually Nigerian, so I'm just like,
we're so biased. Mine is words of affirmation, but for the opposite reason of you, Amina. Because I grew up, my parents are Nigerian, but my parents are like, I love you parents. In my house, we have a rule, like, when you leave the house, you have to say I love you before you leave,
Mine
because
are
if
like
something
that.
happens to you. So my parents were like, I love you parents, I'm proud of you parents. Like I heard it all the time. So for me, mine's words of affirmation, because I was so used to growing up hearing how amazing I was. You're the best, you're so beautiful, you're so wonderful. If I don't hear it,
You're
it's like, oh, tell me I'm wonderful. Like I'm used to that. Like I'm wonderful. So it's kind of like the opposite. But then it does go down and come back to my relationship or our relationships with our parents.
No, it's so interesting.
I think, mine was quality time, but I guess for me, quality time is so important. Like, if I could, it could be needy as well, but if you're there,
There's nothing wrong with that.
If you're there and you're with me and we're spending time together, for me, that is just like amazing. That's us like taking the time to actually be in each other's space, get to know each other. And then my second one, physical touch, can obviously like play a role.
Affirmations is definitely there for me as well, but I'm very careful. Like, you have to at least have shown me acts of service, then the affirmations actually
I think
come
that's
in.
what it is,
Because, once again, I don't just like hearing things, I like you showing me. And it's similar to your story, Tony, like, even in my family group chat, first thing we say, or the last thing we say rather in our group chat is, I love you, I love you, I love you. Even if we're not talking, randomly, my sister will send me a message, I love you, and I will do the same. And if you're not saying it, once again, I'm thinking, what the hell? Have I done something? Is there something wrong? So I think it's definitely important.
I think it's quite interesting that both of you have acts of service in the same way that we have words of affirmation, but you're also opposites as well. So your dad wasn't there, but you want acts of service. Well, your dad is there, but you still want acts of service.
It's so interesting that even with that balance of both, words of affirmation still does absolutely nothing.